It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Today on the Happy Families Podcast, a conversation about what do you do when you cannot get your teenager to school? They're big enough to say no and mean it, and there's not much that you can do about it. Throw in the complexity of a neurodivergent child and it makes things really tough. In addition, a quick chat about what happens when the stuff going on at school around rewards and token systems is inconsistent with what happens at home. How can the two coexist? Will this work? Every Tuesday on the Happy Families Podcast, I answer your questions. If you want to know about making your relationship stronger, improving your well-being, or making your family happier, all you have to do is submit a question. Submit your questions with the super simple system at happyfamilies.com.au. All you have to do to find it is go to the homepage, scroll down to the podcast section, press the record button, and start talking. Just like Robert, who's hitting us up with question number 1.
My son is 14 and recently diagnosed with ASD, and there's a question mark on PDA. He won't go to school and won't engage in any schoolwork, even with encouragement. Any attempt to get him to engage is met with anger and further disengagement. All he wants to do is game, and when this is removed, it results in World War III in the home. I have no tools to manage this. What should I do?
Okay, Robert, really appreciate the question and the thoughtfulness of it and the challenge that you're experiencing. Couple of things. This topic of school refusal just keeps on coming up. The research around this highlights really clearly that, well, if you're an educator, the expectations are high and it's just a tough gig to get this right, especially with additional needs. Let's just get a couple of things clear for people who are not familiar with all the terms. ASD, we're talking about autism spectrum disorder. Robert hasn't mentioned what level we're talking about, but there are 3 levels. The higher the level, so level 1, 2, and 3, the higher level, the greater the challenges, the greater the impairments or deficits. Not a huge fan of the deficit model, by the way, but that's the way it's currently described. PDA, pathological demand avoidance. In other words, when we make a demand of our child, they respond with a pathological response to avoid doing what they've been asked. I don't like that title at all. I think that it's unhelpful. And again, it just pathologizes everything that children are going through and makes it look like they are the problem. My preferred term is persistent desire for autonomy. And what that highlights is that some children really, really prize their autonomy a lot more than others. All right, so listen to this question, Robert. 2 issues. Number 1, we've got school refusal, a desire to not be there. Technically, in the research literature, we would call it emotion-based school avoidance, which I think is a much more helpful term. I know that there are some people out there who call it school can't. I find that a completely unhelpful term, and frankly, it's not an accurate reflection of what the challenges really are. The second issue they've highlighted is gaming and the conflict around gaming, because we've got this kid who says, I don't want to go to school, I just want to game, and if you tell me I can't game, I'm going to spit the dummy and create some noise about it. Now, the additional challenge here is you've added the words 14-year-old. Presents a major challenge. 14-year-old boys, they're getting bigger, they can throw their weight around, they can definitely fight harder, even if it's only verbally and psychologically. But when they dig their heels in, it's not like you can pick them up the way you might have done with a 4 or 5-year-old and carry them to the car. Like, this is not going to work. It's just not an option. So where do we go with this? A couple of things to think about when it comes to how we approach our children. The standard response is that you're supposed to create carrots and sticks, punishments and rewards to get that child to show up and do what you're expecting them to do. There's this thing called applied behavior analysis that's all about that process. I think it's tremendously unhelpful. When a 14-year-old with ASD and PDA refuses school for video games, I don't see this as defiance. I see it as a distress signal. Their brain is seeking comfort in what you could only call a predictable world of games because they're overwhelmed by the social and sensory demands of what's happening at school. And then home conflict just adds fuel to the fire. Robert, I think the key really is connection, which is the last thing that you want. I mean, these are the sorts of situations where you start looking at your child and say, I don't really like you. I mean, I love you because you're my child, but you're not nice to be around and this is not working. And that's why I think the key has to be connection, not control. Therefore, we're looking to approach with curiosity as opposed to criticism. You might say something like, you know what, mate, I know school's really tough. I can see that. Let's explore what makes it so hard. and find ways that we can make it better together. So you're validating their feelings, you're collaborating on solutions, you're fostering a sense of safety, because beneath that resistance, there's a yearning for understanding and support. I don't care what the diagnosis is. This is a basic human need, and children want it from their parents more than anything at all. I want to highlight a couple of other things here. I reckon as you do an exploration about what's going wrong with school or what's hard about school, you're going to find that your son's basic psychological needs are simply not being supported in the school environment. Now, sometimes that is the fault of teachers or the school environment, but often it's just the reality of life. I mean, life is not what I would call needs supportive so much of the time. Modern, busy life with success, aspirations and achievement goals and all that kind of thing. So much of it is not consistent with what our children need psychologically. That is, they need a sense of strong relationship and belonging. They need to feel competent, and they need a sense of control and autonomy and volition in their lives. So if you've got an autistic boy who's got PDA showing up at school, they're going to feel incompetent in the classroom in terms of their relationships and their academic progress. The teacher's going to be mad at them, and peers will look at them differently. So there's going to be relationship challenges. And ultimately, there's going to be all this control from you and from the school to make things happen the way that the system demands, and it's inconsistent with what your child wants. Note also, when it comes to neurotypical kids, so there's a part of your brain towards the back of your brain, it's called the cerebellum, and it's really in charge of automating a lot of what we do. Like, it has contact with about 80% of the rest of the brain in terms of taking behaviors on board, automating them, and making it so that we don't have to think too hard about what we're doing. We just do that. Now, if you've got a neurodivergent child, those behaviors never really automate. They become effortful. Now, that means if they really like the thing, even though it's effortful, they will find their genius in it, which is wonderful, right? But quite often, because it's effortful, you just get refusal. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good in any way, shape, or form. So you get this situation basically where the more effortful control is required, the more likely it is that you're going to end up relying on carrots and sticks to push your child into what it is that you want them to do. But the more emotional valence is high, the more your child is going to be saying, I really like doing this, I'm emotionally connected with it, the more intrinsic it is. And that's what we're trying to move towards. How do we get there? I listened to this conversation, and what I hear you saying, Robert, is you understand that education matters. You want your son to understand that as well. The real challenge is helping him to move into a situation where there can be a little less high cognitive effort and a little bit more high emotional valence. In other words, how do we get him moving into a place where he's intrinsically oriented rather than extrinsically motivated? School is probably not doing it for him at the moment. Just some quick stats on this. In Queensland, homeschooling has jumped from 3,500 kids in the state in 2019 to 11,500 in 2024. I look at the situation where you've got this 14-year-old boy and I just think maybe get him to year 10. If you can't do homeschooling, at least get him to year 10. Look for trade schools, opportunities to zero in, or find what his genius is and give him every opportunity around that to facilitate it over and above what video games are giving him. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Ultimately, this is a tough job. I go back to my initial statement. Beneath the resistance, there's a yearning for understanding and support. His brain is seeking comfort in what's predictable. You're dealing with distress signals. When someone is distressed, they don't think clearly. So spend time exploring, explain what you're looking for, and then empower him to find solutions with you that can work for both of you, because those boundaries matter and education is important. Tough question. Good luck with it, Robert. Wish you all the best. Up next, a conversation about what to do when approaches at school are different to approaches at home. Okay, question number 2 from Sian.
Hello. My 2 primary school children attend a school that use a points reward system. Every lesson, every teacher, it's heavily promoted. And it seems to work. The children there's less behavior problems. They're engaged, they're learning. I know because I've just started working there. However, my children less cooperative at home. And I wonder if they're not intrinsically motivated because of the reward system at school. What do you think?
You know what, Sian? When it comes to extrinsic motivators, punishments and rewards, The simple fact is they work. But work to do what is the real question, and you've zeroed in on it. It's the type of regulation that matters. Essentially, there's no internalization. So when the teacher is not there, the kids will usually do whatever they want. It's just that they've understood the system. There's a whole lot of other people who are also doing it. The teacher has one job, which is to maintain some level of behavioral control so that they can teach the lesson, and that's simply the way that it rolls out. That's why it seems like it's working. Now, in the home, we've got a whole bunch of other things that are occurring. We're dealing with things like a difference in the relationship, the fact that kids can say no to you and you still have to love them and keep them in the house, and you're not going to be able to send them to the principal or someone else to look after them because you're the parent. And I think that there are some other challenges here. You're not going for immediate compliance. You're trying to build a human rather than just develop this academic outcome in a child. Now, I absolutely acknowledge that many teachers do such great work on character education and building kids up. I certainly don't want to diminish the role of teacher, but teachers and parents are different. Children know it. We know it as adults. And when we're in the four walls of our home, we absolutely feel it, especially when you're dealing with the kind of stuff that you're highlighting. They're just golden children at school, and they come home and they're tired and they're worn out and they say no and they refuse to do stuff. And you just kind of think, what is going on? They're so compliant at school. I'm not happy about this. Okay, so what do we do about it? What's the best way? Look, ultimately, this is a conversation about structure. At school, the structure is usually pretty clear. It's transparent. It's often on the whiteboard or on the wall on a big piece of cardboard. And at home, structure can be a little bit more flaky. It can be a bit more inconsistent. There are more moving parts. No, our lives change at home. It's not the 9 to 3. We're teaching lessons and then we're moving on with things. Lots of variables in the school classroom, but there's one clear purpose. Whereas at home, there's extracurricular activities, there's an unexpected night out, there's that emergency, there's having to work late. There's all these things that throw the structure into disarray. There's a child who has a nightmare one night and they don't sleep well, and that means that they wake up late the next morning, and then you've got all the chaos that goes with that. So what do we do to build structure? This is where I kind of point to the family meetings. Kylie has been talking about family meetings a lot on our I'll Do Better Tomorrow episodes of the podcast. And the reason that we share this so much is because it works. Does it work perfectly first go? No, of course not. Everything in family life is a process and a refining of the system. But it does the job of getting the system refined. So what I'm pointing you towards is to sit down on a Sunday with the kids, pull out a couple of treats and spend 10 or 15 minutes saying, hey, what's working, what's not, and what can we improve on this week? What went well, what didn't, and what can we pick on to make better? Not who, what can we pick on to make better this week? Sometimes you pick stuff that's going well because you want to do more of it. Sometimes you pick things that aren't going so well because you want to improve in those areas. Encourage your kids to have a voice. Provide really clear rationales when you're explaining this is what we want and this is why, and develop solutions together. Ultimately, in spite of the disparity between what happens at school and what happens at home, the kids will be okay. The influence that you have is vastly greater than anything that's going to happen in a school classroom, in spite of the fact that there are so many hours spent with that teacher and with those peers. What you do at home, the example that you set, the conversations that you have, that's what sets your kids up to figure out how life is done and how to build character. Sian, I hope that's a helpful response. It might not have been the answer you were looking for, but it really comes down to conversations, and those family meetings, I think, are the best vehicle for those conversations. Good luck. Next week, more questions on the Happy Families podcast to help you to make your family happier, to get your relationships stronger, and to help you to improve your well-being. If you'd like to submit a question, please visit happyfamilies.com.au. That's where you find our super simple system where you literally press the record button, start talking. Love answering your questions. happyfamilies.com.au. The super simple system. Just press record and start talking in the podcast section of the homepage. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. If you would like more information about how to make your family happier, visit us at happyfamilies.com.au and subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out once a week and it gives you the very best advice with no big sells, just evidence-based ways that you can build a happier family. happyfamilies.com.au.